Welcome, everyone, to Bible Retold. Have you ever tried to picture a moment of such absolute, intoxicating power that the roar of a crowd could seemingly transform a mere mortal into a god right before your very eyes? Imagine, if you will, a magnificent, opulent palace, sunlight glinting off marble and gold. A vast assembly of people, a sea of faces, all turned towards one focal point. Trumpets blare, a sound that shakes the very foundations, and a king dressed in robes so dazzling they seem woven from starlight itself, ascends his throne to a crescendo of adulation. The crowd, caught in a frenzy of almost religious fervor, screams in ecstatic unison, "It is the voice of a god, not of a man." The king, he smiles, a slow, self-satisfied smile, basking in every syllable of their worship, every ounce of their devotion. But does anyone, even for a fleeting second, notice something imperceptible, something chillingly sinister, beginning to stir deep within him at that precise moment of unholy glory? And then the unthinkable. A searing, gut-wrenching pain rips through him, a sudden, brutal agony. The body that just moments ago stood as a pillar of strength and majesty begins to falter, to weaken. He tries to speak, to command, but the voice that once boomed with authority now only produces garbled, choking sounds. He stumbles, then collapses to the ground, shrieking in a mixture of terror and disbelief. What is happening to me? What is this? And then a scene unfolds that is more horrifying than your darkest nightmare. Worms, writhing, ravenous worms, begin to consume him from the inside out, devouring him alive, turning living flesh into putrefying decay before the stunned, horrified eyes of the very people who had just proclaimed him a god. No, my friends, this isn't some gruesome urban legend, nor is it a scene ripped from the pages of a macabre horror novel. This is a true story, a chilling historical event meticulously recorded in the Holy Scriptures. Today on Bible Retold, we will peel back the layers of time to uncover the terrifying details of what might be the most horrific death recorded in the Bible, the divine judgment upon a king who dared to steal the glory that belongs to God alone. I urge you to stay with me until the very end, because this story is more than just a shocking historical account. It has the power to fundamentally change the way you perceive pride, the true nature of power, and the awesome, inescapable judgment of the Almighty. And before we dive headfirst into this dramatic and sobering narrative, tell me, where are you listening from today, and what time is it where you are? Drop a comment below and let us know. It's incredible to think of our Bible Retold community stretching across so many different corners of the world and time zones. Your presence here means the world to us. To truly comprehend the most dreadful death described in the Bible, we must journey back in time to unearth the identity of the man at the center of this divine retribution. His name was Herod Agrippa I. The name Herod itself carries a dark and bloody legacy. Agrippa was the grandson of Herod the Great, the infamous tyrant who, in a fit of paranoid rage, ordered the slaughter of innocent baby boys in Bethlehem, in a desperate attempt to eliminate the infant Jesus. It seems the poison of arrogance and a ruthless thirst for power ran deep in this family's veins, a dark inheritance passed down through generations. Herod Agrippa ruled over Judea, a land steeped in religious history and fervent nationalism, under the full sanction and military backing of the mighty Roman Empire. He was, in essence, a client king, a political puppet whose strings were pulled by Rome, tasked with maintaining order and ensuring the steady flow of taxes to the imperial coffers. However, unlike many of the cruel and overtly oppressive vassal kings of his era, Herod Agrippa was a master politician, a shrewd and cunning operator who understood the delicate art of public relations and manipulating popular sentiment. He knew the paramount importance of winning the hearts, or at least the grudging acceptance, of the Jewish people, a populace deeply devoted to their religious traditions and fiercely protective of their cultural identity. To this end, Agrippa made a public show of piety. He frequently visited the temple in Jerusalem, the most sacred site in Judaism, participating in religious ceremonies with an air of solemn reverence. He meticulously observed Jewish customs and laws, at least outwardly, and was careful to cultivate strategic alliances with influential religious leaders of the day, such as members of the Pharisee and Sadducee parties. Through these calculated gestures, Herod Agrippa skillfully crafted an image of himself as an approachable, understanding ruler who respected the faith of his subjects. But all of this, the public displays of devotion, the carefully cultivated relationships, the veneer of respect for tradition, was little more than an elaborate facade, a meticulously constructed mask designed to conceal the darkness that festered within. Deep in the recesses of Herod Agrippa's heart, the unquenchable fire of blind ambition burned with a terrifying intensity. He craved absolute power, he lusted after immortal glory, and he was willing to do almost anything to achieve his goals, even if it meant trampling on the beliefs and lives of others. The intoxicating allure of earthly glory had blinded him, causing him to forget the fundamental truth that all authority ultimately comes from God, and that He alone is worthy of worship. The tragic story we are about to dissect is vividly chronicled in the book of Acts, chapter 12, a chapter filled with high drama, divine intervention, and profound spiritual lessons. The chapter opens with a grim depiction of Herod Agrippa's brutal persecution of the nascent Christian community, which was steadily growing in numbers and influence. With cold, calculated cruelty, he ordered the execution of James, the brother of John the Apostle, by the sword. This was not merely an act of random violence. It was a clear message intended to intimidate the burgeoning church and, significantly, to curry favor with the conservative Jewish leadership, who viewed the followers of Christ as a dangerous threat to their established traditions and authority. Seeing that the murder of James pleased these influential Jewish figures, Herod Agrippa, ever the opportunist, swiftly moved to arrest Peter, one of the most prominent and respected leaders of the early church. His objective was clear: to decapitate the Christian movement by eliminating its key figures, thereby extinguishing the spreading flame of this new faith and further consolidating his own power. Peter was thrown into prison, heavily guarded, bound in chains, awaiting what seemed an inevitable trial and execution. All hope appeared to be lost. But as the old saying goes, man proposes, God disposes. In that darkest hour, when despair seemed absolute, God intervened in a truly miraculous fashion. An angel of the Lord appeared to Peter, freeing him from his chains and leading him supernaturally past baffled guards and through locked iron gates. This astounding event was an undeniable demonstration, a powerful message to Herod and to the world that no matter how much earthly power a ruler might wield, he was not in ultimate control. The power of God transcends all human authority, and His divine purposes will invariably be fulfilled. A few days after Peter's miraculous escape, an event that undoubtedly irked and perhaps even frightened Herod, the king traveled from Jerusalem to the grand port city of Caesarea Maritima. Caesarea was a major Roman administrative and military hub in Judea, a city built by Herod the Great to impress Rome and project power. Agrippa was there to preside over an important political event, possibly a festival in honor of the Roman Emperor Claudius, or a summit with high-ranking Roman officials. For Agrippa, this was a prime opportunity to display his wealth, his authority, and his unwavering loyalty to the Roman Empire. Before a massive crowd of dignitaries, citizens, and soldiers assembled in the city's grand amphitheater, Herod Agrippa made his entrance, arrayed in royal robes of breathtaking splendor. Contemporary historians, including the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, who lived through these times, describe his garment as being intricately woven entirely of silver threads. As the Mediterranean sun blazed down, the silver robe caught and reflected the light, creating an almost blinding aura around him, making him appear to the awestruck onlookers like a celestial being, a god descended to earth. The crowd, already primed for adulation and spectacle, was utterly captivated by this display of regal magnificence. When Herod Agrippa began to deliver his oration, his voice resonating with the practiced eloquence of a seasoned statesman, the crowd was mesmerized. In their eyes, he was no longer just a king, he was something more, something divine. Swept up in a wave of collective, almost hysterical adulation, they began to shout, their voices thundering through the amphitheater, "It is the voice of a god and not of a man, the voice of a god." These words of flattery, this blasphemous praise, swirled around Agrippa, seeping into his ears, intoxicating his very soul. And this, my friends, is the critical juncture, the precise moment where the die was cast for this unfolding tragedy. Instead of humbly deflecting this worship, instead of correcting the crowd and reminding them that he was merely a mortal man, a servant of the emperor, and ultimately of God, Herod Agrippa, he smiled. He accepted their adoration. He reveled in it. He drank in their words of deification like a potent, addictive wine, allowing himself to believe in his heart of hearts that he truly was something more than human. In that singular moment of unbridled pride, he arrogated to himself the glory that belongs to God alone. He placed himself on a pedestal meant only for the Almighty, and in that same moment his colossal arrogance reached its zenith, and the cup of God's righteous indignation overflowed. Divine justice, which had been patiently observing, struck with swift and terrifying finality. The Bible records it starkly. Immediately, because Herod did not give praise to God, an angel of the Lord struck him down. A direct, instantaneous, and undeniably supernatural intervention. The king, who mere moments before had been hailed as a deity, suddenly felt an excruciating, tearing pain deep within his bowels. And he was eaten by worms and died, the scripture concludes with chilling brevity. A ruler who seemed invincible, a man who commanded legions and held the power of life and death, was brought low in the most humiliating and grotesque manner imaginable, consumed from within by a pestilence of worms, his body becoming a putrid, living sermon on the fatal consequences of pride before the very eyes of those who had just worshipped him. This is not merely a tale of a bizarre and gruesome death. It is a profound spiritual warning, a timeless message about the sanctity of God's glory and his absolute sovereignty. And now let us delve deeper into the shadowy details, the underlying currents of this horrifying judgment, to more fully understand the nature of sin and the unwavering justice of the Most High. Let's try to paint an even more vivid picture of that scene. Herod Agrippa stands before a teeming multitude gathered in the grand amphitheater of Caesarea Maritima. Caesarea was no ordinary city. It was a marvel of Roman engineering and Herodian ambition, a city built to impress, featuring a sophisticated artificial harbor, magnificent temples dedicated to Rome and Augustus, a vast theater and an amphitheater. It was a day of public festival, a grand celebration perhaps, as some historians suggest, in honor of Emperor Claudius, who had been instrumental in Agrippa's rise to power over the full territory of Judea. Everything was orchestrated for maximum opulence, a raw display of power and ostentation designed to awe both the local populace and visiting Roman dignitaries. Into this lavish setting steps Herod Agrippa, cloaked in his robe woven entirely of silver. As the early morning sun's rays struck the garment, the polished silver threads acted like 1,000 tiny mirrors, reflecting the light with such intensity that, according to Josephus, he literally seemed to blaze, to radiate an almost unbearable brilliance. The eyes of the crowd were transfixed, filled with a mixture of admiration, awe, and very quickly, a sense of worshipful reverence. They had likely never witnessed such a dazzling spectacle of royal power. When he began to speak, his voice amplified by the amphitheater's acoustics and his own practiced oratory, The crowd was swept away by an atmosphere of almost hysterical adulation. They weren't just listening to a speech. They were experiencing what they perceived as a divine epiphany. And then the shouts erupted, echoing from every corner of the vast arena. "This is not the voice of a man, but the voice of a god." The intoxicating nectar of flattery saturated the air, and Herod Agrippa's heart swelled with an unbearable vanity, a delusional belief in his own superhuman status. He could have stopped it. He could have raised a hand, corrected their misguided zeal, perhaps even said, "My friends, I am but a man like you, a servant of Caesar, and a humble subject of the one true God." But he said nothing. Herod Agrippa remained silent, and his silence was his consent. He drank in their worship as if it were the finest wine, allowing its intoxicating fumes to cloud his judgment, convincing himself that he truly was something beyond mortal, something akin to the divine. In that precise moment, as his pride reached its blasphemous peak, the stage was set for God's dramatic and terrifying intervention. This was not just a historical event. It was a living, breathing portrait of human pride in its most dangerous and destructive form. When a created being desires to usurp the place and glory of the Creator, it's crucial to note that at that specific moment, Herod Agrippa wasn't being judged for overt acts of corruption, adultery, or initiating violence, though his reign was not without its shadows. His downfall was precipitated by a sin of the heart, a sin of hubris. He corrupted himself with the worship that was due to God alone. He became his own idol and demanded that others bow before it, and that is what made his fall so utterly catastrophic and so profoundly instructive. God, who sees beyond the outward show, who pierces through the glittering facades to the very core of human motivation, saw Herod's heart. He saw it puffed up with insufferable arrogance, closed off to any semblance of humility, and blinded to the true glory that belongs exclusively to the Almighty. And the same crowd that had just deified him would, mere moments later, become horrified witnesses to his complete physical and spiritual collapse. Pride, then, is the very doorway through which divine judgment often enters. And when God acts, no earthly throne, no matter how powerful or well fortified, can remain standing. While Herod Agrippa was still savoring the applause, still basking in the adoring gazes of the crowd, something happened that no one expected, something that brought the grand event to a screeching, terrifying halt. The Bible in Acts 12:23 states it with stark, unembellished clarity. Immediately, because Herod did not give praise to God, an angel of the Lord struck him down, and he was eaten by worms and died. A single sentence, swift, direct, and overwhelmingly supernatural. The biblical text leaves no room for doubt, no space for naturalistic explanations. This wasn't a common illness that suddenly manifested. It wasn't a natural infection that could be explained by the medicine of the day. This was the explicit, targeted judgment of God. It was as if God himself declared, "This glory is not yours to claim, Herod. The very mouth that uttered words of pride will now writhe in agony. The body adorned in shining silver will now decay before the eyes of this assembly." What is perhaps even more chilling is that he did not die instantly. God's judgment was not a quick, merciful end, but a prolonged, agonizing process of decay. Historical tradition, including the detailed accounts of the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, who was a contemporary of these events, reports that Herod Agrippa suffered excruciating abdominal pains for 5 days. His body, once a symbol of power and luxury, became a horrific breeding ground for worms, which began to consume him from the inside out while he was still alive. Fully conscious of his grotesque and humiliating demise. Try to truly visualize this. The most powerful ruler in the region, a man dressed like a god, hailed as divine, now writhing in abject despair, his body being slowly, inexorably consumed by creatures so small they are often invisible to the naked eye. It's a scene of divine judgment so visceral, so graphic, It transcends any natural explanation. And the message thundering from this horrific spectacle is crystal clear. God does not and will not share his glory with anyone. The manner of Herod's death and being eaten by worms carries immense symbolic weight within the biblical worldview. Throughout the scriptures, worms are consistently associated with corruption, decay, divine judgment, and the ultimate fate of the wicked. The prophet Isaiah, speaking of the eternal punishment reserved for those who rebel against God, declared, "Their worm will not die, nor will their fire be quenched." Isaiah 66:24. This is the language of the most profound judgment, reserved for those who defiantly reject the sovereignty and holiness of God. Herod Agrippa, therefore, did not die merely as a physical punishment. His death was a sign, a terrifying public object lesson. He became a living and then a dying testament to the fact that no one, regardless of their influence, power, or perceived greatness, can escape divine justice when they presume to usurp God's rightful place. The judgment did not come through swords or armies. It came in an invisible, silent, and utterly lethal form, an angelic touch, and the worms did the rest. A gruesome end, but a priceless lesson for all who have ears to hear. The death of Herod Agrippa, devoured by worms, is far more than just an ancient, shocking, and rather gruesome story. It carries within it profound spiritual lessons, timeless warnings that are incredibly relevant to every single one of us living in the world today. In a culture that often celebrates, even deifies, pride, vanity, and the relentless pursuit of personal glory, this narrative from Acts 12 sounds like a piercing alarm bell, a stern warning echoing directly from the pages of Scripture. Remember, Herod Agrippa, at that specific moment of judgment, wasn't being punished for overtly attempting to murder someone, nor for launching an unjust war. The sin that cost him his life was one that many today might dismiss as a common human failing, perhaps even a necessary ingredient for success: pride. He accepted, he embraced, he reveled in the glory that belongs solely and exclusively to God. And God, who is zealous for his own honor, responded with terrifying severity. The first and most crucial lesson we must absorb from this tragedy is this: God does not share his glory with anyone. The Bible reiterates this truth countless times across different books and dispensations. In Isaiah 42:8, God himself declares, "I am the Lord, that is my name. I will not yield my glory to another or my praise to idols." When human beings, finite creatures, place themselves at the center of their own universe, when they seek adulation and worship for themselves, they set themselves on a direct collision course with their Creator. It doesn't matter if that person is a king ruling a nation, a celebrated artist, a renowned preacher, or an ordinary citizen. When the heart is consumed by self-glorification, when the self becomes more important than God, the spiritual peril is immense and very real. The second lesson lies in a stark reality. God's judgment can manifest in unexpected, silent, and swift ways. Herod Agrippa wasn't forewarned by a prophet, nor did he receive a cautionary dream. There were no thunderclaps from heaven, no earthquakes to signal divine displeasure. It was a single, invisible touch from the divine realm, and everything changed in an instant. This teaches us that God's judgment isn't always loud, spectacular, or overtly dramatic. Sometimes he acts quietly, almost imperceptibly to the casual observer, but always with absolute precision and irresistible power. And what might appear to be merely a natural consequence, a tragic accident, or an unfortunate illness could, in fact, be the very hand of God moving in justice. The third lesson, and perhaps the one with the most immediate practical application for our daily lives, is an urgent call to true humility. Instead of constantly seeking external validation, the likes on social media, the applause of the crowd, the status symbols of worldly success, We must learn to fix our eyes and hearts upon God. We must cultivate a deep, abiding recognition that everything good we possess, our talents, our opportunities, our health, our intellect, even our very breath, comes from Him as a gift of His grace. The Apostle James writes in his epistle, chapter 4, verse 6, "God opposes the proud but shows favor to the humble." This divine opposition is not a light matter. It's a genuine spiritual barrier, a direct confrontation with the Creator's will. Pride may appear to elevate a person in the eyes of the world, but in God's eyes, it is a perilous descent towards a spiritual abyss. And finally, Herod Agrippa's horrific demise demonstrates unequivocally that God remains the ultimate sovereign over all earthly kings, over all the powerful, over all leaders, and indeed, over every single human being. No throne on earth is secure if it is built upon the shifting sands of arrogance. No crown can remain steady if its wearer fails to acknowledge the true King of Kings, the ultimate source of all authority. Herod Agrippa attempted to steal God's glory, and he paid the ultimate price, his life, in a manner most degrading and terrifying. This story, though harsh and chilling, is ultimately a warning steeped in mercy, because if we are hearing this account today, if we are reflecting upon its implications, it is so that we do not have to tread the same disastrous path. It is so that by looking to the cross of Jesus Christ, we see the perfect antithesis to Herod's pride, the ultimate model of humility. Jesus, though he was in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped or exploited for his own advantage. Instead, he emptied himself, taking the very nature of a servant, and humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. And because of this profound humility and obedience, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name. Philippians 2, 6-9. Pride may offer a fleeting sense of self-importance, a temporary illusion of grandeur, but it ultimately corrupts and destroys the soul. Humility, on the other hand, though it may appear as a path of weakness or insignificance in the world's estimation, is, in God's eyes, the very beginning of true exaltation and enduring life. If the death of Herod Agrippa shocks us, if it fills us with a sense of dread, it is because it was designed to do precisely that. It was not merely a punishment, it was a divine sign, a sacred warning that no one is above the justice of God, no one can trample upon His holiness and escape the consequences. In our modern world, we may not be surrounded by crowds literally screaming that we are gods, yet the human heart, in its fallen state, remains perpetually tempted by the same ancient allurements. The craving for personal glory, the thirst for power and control, the unquenchable desire for fame and recognition. And it is precisely at this juncture that we must pause, take a deep breath, and engage in serious self-reflection. Am I, perhaps unknowingly, placing myself at the center of my own life, relegating God to the periphery? Am I subtly or overtly attempting to claim a position, a level of adoration, or a degree of glory that rightfully belongs only to Him? This is an earnest invitation to repentance, to sincere, heartfelt humility. It's a call to understand that everything we have and everything we are, our talents, our opportunities, our influence, our very existence, has been entrusted to us by God, not for self-aggrandizement, but for His glory and the service of others. And He continues to watch, to observe the innermost posture of our hearts. The story of Herod Agrippa is not just a blood-stained page from ancient history. It is a mirror reflecting directly into the deepest, often hidden chambers of the human soul, your soul and my soul. And when we dare to look into that mirror, we must be brutally honest with ourselves, without pretense, without excuses. Don't wait for God to interrupt your life's journey with pain, loss, or a devastating crisis to compel you to turn your gaze toward Him. Today, right now, while there is still time, while His grace is still abundantly available, Acknowledge the absolute sovereignty of God over your life. Willingly step down from the throne of your ego. Surrender your pride, because a life lived in humble submission at the feet of Jesus is infinitely more valuable than wearing a crown of worldly success conquered at the cost of your eternal soul. So now you know the full, unvarnished story of what is arguably the most terrifying and symbolically potent death recorded in the Bible, that of King Herod Agrippa, eaten by worms as a direct divine punishment for his insufferable pride. It's abundantly clear that the consequences of extreme arrogance and blasphemous self-exaltation, especially when directed against God himself, are not merely spiritual or abstract. They can be terrifyingly real, visceral, and devastating. This passage from the book of Acts, though brief, teaches us a powerful and sobering lesson. We cannot trifle with the majesty and holiness of God, nor can we presume to elevate our finite selves above the infinite Creator. His justice is certain, impartial, and ultimately inescapable for those who willfully defy him. But more than just a frightening tale or a stern admonition, this story is an urgent call to each one of us for profound self-examination. Where are we truly placing our trust, our ultimate allegiance, our worship? Whom are we really serving in the day-to-day unfolding of our lives? Is your heart aligned with God's purposes, seeking his glory above all else? Or are you, perhaps subtly, allowing yourself to be swept away by the insidious currents of pride, by the fleeting vanities of this world, or by an insatiable, exhausting quest for status and recognition? Remember always, the path to true life, to lasting peace and genuine fulfillment, is the path of humility, surrender, and unwavering faith in God. If this message, this ancient yet ever-relevant story, has touched something deep within your heart, I implore you, don't let it simply fade away once this recording ends. Take action today. Seek God earnestly in prayer. Open your heart to him with complete honesty, confessing your weaknesses and any hidden pride, and allow him, by his Spirit, to transform your life from the inside out. Please share this video, this message, with others you know, friends, family, anyone who you feel needs to hear this vital warning about the gravity of pride before a holy God and the immeasurable value of true humility. And of course, if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button for Bible Retold and ring the notification bell. That way you won't miss out on future episodes where we'll continue to explore more of these transformative and illuminating stories from the Scriptures. Your support is an invaluable encouragement to us as we continue this journey together. Above all, please don't let this reflection die here. Carry this truth with you into every day, into every interaction, into every decision. Strive to live a life that honors God in all your attitudes and actions, because in the grand scheme of things, that is what truly matters. That is what has eternal significance. Thank you for joining us on Bible Retold. May God bless you richly.